Welcome to We Are Old, Get Over It, the podcast where we celebrate the wisdom of age and maybe a little grumbling too. Our guests dive into topics that matter most to us, from navigating the digital world to embracing new adventures and the challenges that hold us back. Join me for about 30 minutes of insightful conversations, honest reflections, and a whole lot of get over it attitude. So let's get started. All right. First of all, I want to thank Ken Womack for agreeing to speak to me. I had a difficult time trying to get a hold of any of the Beatles, the living ones, that is. He and I made a pact to try to track them down this past year to get them to participate in the interview, but we never heard from them. Did you hear from them?
I have not heard from them.
I have not heard from them either. But if at any point you would like to speak to either of us, we welcome you to contact us at We Are Old, Get Over It Podcast. After we fall off our chairs, we'll be happy to have an interview with you. Is that correct, Ken?
Always.
All right. Okay. So today we're going to be discussing a book. It's called Living the Beatles Legend, the Untold Story of Mal Evans. And the author of the book is Ken Womack. I have some notes on Ken Womack, but I'm just going to start out by saying, if you do a study of anyone who is a biographer of the Beatles, his name will be number 1 or 2 in the world. And I really do appreciate you being here with me today to discuss the Beatles and the insights that you're going to be able to produce for us, even if people haven't read your book yet. But at the end, we're going to tell them where they can get the book, which is basically everywhere. You can get it on Amazon. That's where I got my copy. I got my copy on Amazon. It is a long book. My first question is, I want to first read a quote, which is what I usually do on the podcast. So the quote I'm going to read today is by Steve Jobs. My model for business is the Beatles. They were 4 guys that kept each other's negative tendencies in check. They balanced each other, and the total was greater than the sum of the parts. And with that, I'm going to ask Ken to, it's funny that I'm a Ken and he's a Ken. I'm going to ask you to give me a little bit of information about yourself first, and then also how you decided to do a book about somebody that I knew nothing about until I read your book. But I think that it's a very interesting topic, and I think that basically I'm going to be as quiet as I can be and let you just run with the story. Does that work for you all right, Ken?
Sure. And I enjoy that quote very much. I use it in my own classes that I teach here at Monmouth University on the Jersey Shore. I teach graduate classes in creative writing and then undergraduate classes on the Beatles. And I love that quotation because it reminds us about where we stand in the grand scheme of things. We can all succumb to too much ego on occasion, and that quote is remindful of the ways in which the sum is bigger than the individual, right? And the Beatles, to me, are masterful in just the way that Steve Jobs said, because, and I love sharing this with students, by the way, that these are things that are bigger than ourselves, right? And if we're lucky in life, we get to be involved in artistic fusions or projects where we become part of something larger. And the Beatles are certainly larger than their individual parts. And that's one of the things that makes them so timeless, to my mind. As far as how I got involved in this project, I really wasn't looking for it at all. I, of course, knew about who Mal Evans was. He was the Beatles roadie for most of their time together. He had a counterpart, Neil Aspinall, who started a year or so earlier than he did with them. But I wasn't looking to tell this particular story. I was intrigued by it, like a lot of Beatles writers and fans and aficionados are. I've known a lot about Mal simply from studying them. During COVID, his son Gary approached me about telling his story, his father's story, Mal's story. And like a lot of folks, I had time on my hands during that period.
I remember that
And-
time also.
Yes.
I
And
was making food. I was busy, making recipes for what we were going to eat for the entire week.
Gary is very much like his father. He's a very kind person. And I knew within minutes of speaking with him the first time, Beck, I'm speaking with him later today. But I knew from that very first occasion that I would do whatever it was that would help him out. And it turns out he wanted his father's story to be told. The kicker for me, though, was at the end of the conversation, I figured I could get 80,000 words on Mal. But knowing that I would need to do more, I said to Gary, "So is it true that there was all this stuff?" And Gary said, "Yeah. Do you want to see it?" And I said, "Yes, yes, I do." And within a week or so, a gigantic box arrived on our porch from England, and my wife did what we all did during that period. She brought it inside, wearing gloves, right, and then disinfected the entire box, just as she was doing with our groceries around this period. And we broke it open, and we're almost immediately surprised by all of the things we had never seen before. Mal was a pack rat. He was the first Beatles archivist. Um, Took thousands of photos, collected material, just fascinating archive to behold. And I knew at that point the book was probably going to be double the length that I had originally planned.
Okay. So, uh, you you were enticed by it. When did he has a whole story unto himself. How did he first get hooked up with the Beatles?
Well, that's kind of the strangeness of it. Mal loved rock and roll. He was a big Elvis fan. And at one point, he tried to learn how to play guitar, um, simply because he loved the vocation. He loved rock and roll. He had a job in Liverpool, wherein he was a telecommunications engineer for the British Post Office, the GPO. And Mal um, had free time on his hand at lunch, and he would walk around different parts of the city. Eventually, he found himself in what we now call the Cavern Quarter. He marched down the famous steps because he heard what sounded like, in his words, good rock and roll. um, it uh, he was a little older than everybody by this point. He's about 5 years older than the Beatles themselves, 5 to 7, and, he would have stuck out like a sore thumb for being older, but he would also stick out like a sore thumb for being gigantic.
What do you mean
Um,
by gigantic?
he is huge, 6'3", but almost just as wide. I mean, he has massive wingspan. He's a big guy, was a big guy, and, so and that's a big part of his story because being so large made him feel self-conscious. Um, he had a very good job. Being telecommunications engineer meant that he could afford things that a lot of Liverpudlians couldn't. He had a car, he had a mortgage, had a wife, and by the time he made that first march down the steps, he probably had his first son, Gary, born in 1961. The nearest I can figure is that he was probably marching down those stairs pretty late in 61. He became friends with George Harrison, um, who said, "You love coming here. You're so big and ugly. Wouldn't it be great if you became a bouncer? They need people at the door, and then you could hang out with the bands." And that sounded pretty good to Mal. He didn't particularly need the money, but having extra spending money in that post war world was pretty good. And he began to eventually work for Mr. Epstein at NIMS and become part of the Beatles universe. And the big moment for Mal and the Beatles is in January 1963 when they finally are on the poise of making it with the song "Please Please Me." Neil Aspinall, Mal's counterpart, had gone down with the flu, and they needed someone to cart the Beatles to the Capitol, to do a press run on behalf of "Please Please Me." It was vital, even though there was a massive winter storm taking place. It was called the Big Freeze. It's just incredible. There was frozen ice well into the channel as far as a mile or so. It was quite crazy. So people were closed in and closed at home, not going to work, and they had the radio, of course, and the Beatles were riding high on this new song. So Mal took them down to London, uh, paraded them in front of the press, various TV and radio spots. And it was while they were coming back in this crazy storm, the windshield cracked and snow and ice began to pummel the inside of their van. And the Beatles famously fashioned a mask for Mao with little eye holes so he could see as the onslaught came his way. Meanwhile, they would be in the back with a big bottle of hooch stacked on top of each other for warmth. Paul called it a Beatles sandwich. And they would yell up to Mal, being young, immature guys, how much further to Liverpool? And Mal would say the same thing all night, 200 miles to go, lads. And that became their mantra. Whenever anything bad would happen, Mal would say 200 miles to go. I imagine he probably said it in their dark moments in Manila in 1966 and perhaps other kinds of moments too. Um, in any event, it was the making of their relationship, that moment. And a little later in the year, when they needed another full time employee, Mal was the natural choice.
Mhm. So
And
he
he began
served as
working.
a I'm sorry. So he
Go ahead.
served as kind of like a bodyguard to some degree at
Well,
one point?
he was, as he would admit, he was a pretty poor bodyguard. He probably only had to get physical once or twice for them. Really, his job was we would call him a roadie. He preferred the term road manager. And what he was managing was their equipment. Um, Neil, incredibly, the Beatles, the largest and greatest rock band of all time, had a manager, Brian Epstein, and he's not lifting anything. They had Neil Aspinall, who was Mal's counterpart. And by this point, Neil was starting to drift into making arrangements for them. Their schedule was becoming more complex. And then there was Mal, who would single handedly carry around and set up their equipment. And this would be true for the whole of their story. He'd get a little help toward the end, but really, there were never many more than two or three people working with the Beatles on their world tours. So it was a very different world. He might have imagined, and I'm sure he did in 1966 when they said they would stop touring, what's in it for me now? As George Harrison did. He said, well, I guess I'm not a Beatle anymore. They were all wrong because, of course, these were the studio years. And it turns out they were all needed more than ever because they would put in these long days making Sergeant Pepper and the White Album and Abbey Road and all these masterworks. So Mal became highly in demand in ways that he hadn't been before. Now he's rushing off to music stores to get the Beatles the latest guitars and other kinds of technology.
Okay. And did he participate? I think I had read that he actually contributed to some of the music, uh, of the Beatles. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because that's covered in your book, isn't it?
Oh, yes. And the Beatles are a really small unit. One of their recent CEOs described them as a small family business. And I think that was true. I think it's true now, and it was certainly true then. They had a very small unit. And so when they needed help, there were only a few people around. George Martin, of course, the magisterial producer, who was their, in addition to producing them, their first studio musician. So when they needed somebody to play a note on a keyboard or bang a tambourine or what have you, they would often turn to folks like Mal, that they could trust. And it was really about trust and loyalty with them. Uh, you know, they're the biggest celebrities in the world by a certain point, and um, they couldn't necessarily just let people in. They couldn't let the masses into the studio. So folks like Mal and Neil became even more important as time passed.
Okay. And when, uh he did participate, are there individual songs that he contributed to in any way, shape, or form?
Oh yes, you can hear him on Yellow Submarine. He plays a big bass drum to keep the cadence of that song going, particularly toward the end. You can hear it uh, much more clearly of that song. My gosh, he sings backup vocals on other songs. There's a great George Harrison song where you hear him very clearly, the Ballad of Sir Frankie Crisp.
Oh,
Mal's
yeah.
the one who sings "Oh, Sir Frankie Crisp" in the chorus. So yeah, he's quite audible.
Wow. And did he get credit for those
He
performances?
did a couple of times on the Rubber Soul album. He plays an organ note on "You Won't
One
See Me."
note? Are you telling me he played one note?
He plays one note, and they
Okay.
loved putting him in the credits for that. I mean, it was when you work for the Beatles, you're a jack of all trades. They expect you to, on the one hand, Mal would be making tea, and the next thing you know, they'd be sending him out for an anvil or what have you. I mean, it was that kind of job. When I think about Mal and Neil, it's occasioned me to think about a lot of our great writers and composers and authors, etc. And nobody does it alone. Everybody, despite what they may say or believe, we all need a Mal. You need people who are dedicated to you and your cause. And the Beatles were so fortunate to have Mal and Neil with them because they just simply were too much in demand. They couldn't trust anyone, and to be able to have those guys have their back. And I mean, when you think about the White Album, for example, having a Mal Evans who can go out in the middle of the night and know who doors to bang on to get new drumsticks or guitar strings, that allowed them to work longer and harder. I'm sure in some ways it made a difference on some of the songs we have today.
I have another question. Uh, you mentioned in your book and that when they performed on top of the building, what's the story there? And there's a story about him in particular, uh, where they were performing. I think it was the last time they performed live on the rooftop. Could you could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, it ends up becoming quite fascinating what happens on the rooftop. That's January 30th, 1969. What's interesting about it is the advance work Mal had to do. They couldn't really just step out on their roof and perform. Mal could tell that there were some engineering dangers that were taking place. In fact, he got a team to come out and survey very quickly how the roof needed to be reinforced. So he had some wood planking put out there. In fact, you can see Paul bouncing on it a little bit, just testing out the rooftop. And of course, another problem that occurred was when it was time to bring their equipment up, Mal and his assistant, Kevin Harrington, suddenly found that it wasn't as simple as bringing guitars up via a service elevator. First of all, the elevator was very tiny,
Okay.
maybe just a few square feet. So it was a very narrow elevator. Um, Paul's bass amp was too big, so when they finally got there, they had to take a skylight off to be able to bring that equipment out onto the roof. It was quite an operation to get up there, and I didn't know that until I had access to all of Mal's materials, and it became very clear that had been a much bigger job than I would have imagined. It wasn't just them going upstairs with some amps and cranking it up.
And that was an event where they didn't really announce that they were going to do that, correct?
Right. They didn't announce it at all, because they weren't sure they would, right? I mean, George Harrison was not fond of the idea. I think he said something like, "I don't want to be up there among the chimneys." It was also very cold. There was kind of a whipping wind in the air. And it was finally John who just said, "Let's just go up." And they went up and did it. They didn't really have a prepared set list. You can see in photographs that Mal and Kevin have brought up a lot of keyboards actually that are sitting out on a side roofing area on some eaves. I guess they were thinking about using those too. They didn't ultimately. They had Billy Preston playing his electric piano, but I think they were just trying to be ready for anything. It was that impromptu. They did suggest to Mal at one point that they would have liked to have had helicopters. Um,
Which
Mal
they
was
could have
got
afforded, correct?
yeah, I mean, but the thing was, Mao got so busy, and he was right to do it this way, concerning himself with the engineering of that space and making sure it was safe because it was not. That by the time he made started making phone calls, he learned that you can't just have helicopters run around London airspace, even back then. And he realized that road had already been closed.
Hmm. And people found how did people find out about that concert or that performance
Well,
that they did? And what
so it
happened
really
wait a second, I have another question about that that I could follow up with. What happened with the police department? There was an episode with the police department that he dealt with. So cover those 2 parts of it, would you please?
right. So, you really would have had to have been in Mayfair, which is the garment district around the building, to even know about it. It was, 40 minutes, 45 minutes worth of music. So if you were not in central London already, there's no way you're getting to Savile Row, with the level of traffic that London has always known. It wasn't broadcast live. Of course, it was recorded, in the studio several floors below in the basement. We also had Michael Lindsay Hogg's camera crew upstairs, because they were shooting a documentary. And, they knew that there would probably be, some noise complaints, so they were ready should that come to pass, and it did. For example, there's a hidden camera in the entry vestibule to the Apple offices, um, on the ground floor, and so we have lots of video of Mal welcoming the police in and that sort of thing. He decided he had a little political plan of his for how to deal with them. They would come and knock on the door. Mal would say, "Oh, I'll talk to them. I'll tell them to turn it down." He wouldn't, of course, do that, and he would walk off somewhere and have a cigarette and maybe another cigarette, and then he would come back and he would say, "Oh, hey, you guys, you're still here. Oh, yeah, I'll go check with them." And he would go off for another 15 or 20 minutes. So he bought a lot of time, most of the time he needed in that fashion. Finally, at about the 35-minute mark, a Dag, who was head of the unit and was very young at the time. I think he was about 19. Ray Dag, one of the bobbies, said, "Look, you've got to take us upstairs. We keep getting complaints." And while they're on the way up, I guess, well, no, I know I've spoken to Ray. Ray was perturbed because, he knew Mal had been putting him off all this time. And he put Mal in his book, which means
Gee.
Mal's under arrest. That's that quaint British way. "You are in my book." We'd make a bigger deal out of it, but he was in the book. And of course, now Mal is very stressed because he's never been arrested. This is a big deal. They go up, they make their way up that circuitous last floor or so up to the roof. And Mal, they said, turn off the amps. And Mal screwed up pretty badly, right? And went over and turned off George Harrison's amp. George promptly said, "You don't do that," and turn it back on. They were doing it I guess, their third version or fourth version of Get Back. It was kind of ragged. They had really were out of material at this point, and certainly the energy to do much more. And that's when they closed it down. And John famously said, "Thank you on behalf of the group and ourselves. I hope we pass the audition." Um, and It was over at that point. Mal didn't end up going downtown because on the way back down the stairs, Mr. McCartney, who was very charming, charmed Mal's way out of being in the book. So Mal's no longer under arrest. And, they were quite happy with themselves. They knew they had some good footage. And of course, the rooftop concert is the stuff of legend.
Exactly. That's a great story. That's a great story. Okay, so after that happened, it wasn't that much longer until the Beatles, quote unquote, broke up, correct?
Yeah, it was really so that was January. Their last day together is August 22nd, 1969. In the interim, I was there on the perilous night of May 9th, 1969, when the other Beatles came to corral Paul into signing with Alan Klein. And as Mr. McCartney has said, from that point forward, you know, they could never put themselves back together again. They'd broken, as he said, I like the quote, the Liberty Bell of the Beatles. They'd cracked it. And it was really a matter of time at that point. Fortunately for all of us, they finished Abbey Road first.
Okay. Now, so when the Beatles break up, this is the sad part of the story. Give us a little background of what happened to Mal afterwards. How the interaction with the Beatles affected his interaction with his family, especially his son, because you had information from his son. And then what caused his demise? And I think that's part of the story. It's not necessarily the best part of the story, but
It isn't the best, no, and we wrongly connect it or overconnect it to his relationship with the Beatles. Ultimately, Mal's choices have very little to do, with the Beatles. He remains
really,
very close to them, particularly John, George, and Ringo. Paul, of course, is suing to end the partnership in the high court, which makes him incommunicado at some points. But Mal essentially works for the Beatles as long as they have a partnership, and the partnership does not end officially until around January 1975 when the High Court ratifies the signatures on the dissolution agreement. Until then, he and Neil are paid, and the Beatles are current with them. He works on many of their solo projects, follows them to Los Angeles, eventually gets a girlfriend in LA and stays there. Um, and Mal had been living like this for a long time, where he was having extramarital affairs and friendships in lots of far flung places. The difference was this time he got busted for it. And I imagine his ideation about how he would end his life began sometime pretty early in 1974, because he had been found out that he had been disloyal to his wife and, by extension, his family. He will only go back to England one more time, April or May 1975, to shoot an interview with David Frost for a salute to the Beatles. But otherwise, uh, he was going along trying to find himself. He had had some success as a producer and he wanted to continue that. He'd had a top five hit with Badfinger, No Matter What, one of the great power pop songs of any era. Yeah, and, he knew he had this skill, he'd had some luck working with Ringo, composing a song for the Ringo album, um, but he also, of course, was in the LA of the early 1970s, which was rampant with drug abuse, and, that made it very difficult for him to find himself. He was working on his memoirs and many other projects, but things came to a head when his wife told him that finally, after so much years of this nonsense, so many years of it, she was gonna see a lawyer. And she told him that sometime very late in 1975, probably during their phone call on Christmas Day. Um, well, the clock really started ticking at that point. And on January 4th, after the previous night when Mal wrote his last will and testament, he grabbed his working Winchester rifle and went upstairs and barricaded himself in the bedroom. And his girlfriend, Fran, with little other recourse, called the police. Mal encouraged her to do so. And when they came up to the door, they told him to put down the gun. And in fact, rather than doing that, a very sober Mal aimed it at them and they killed him. But it was suicide by cop.
pretty sad that that would be his ending.
It really is because, when you think about it, there was just so much more upside to come. I guess people you couldn't quite see it in 1976. You couldn't imagine, that the Beatles would make billions of dollars and persist well into the 21st century and very likely far beyond that where we are now. But Mal really developed a kind of tunnel vision at that point that he was not going to see his kids again. He'd spoken to John Lennon, I think, on January 1st or January 2nd, and John had tried to counsel him that, divorce is not the end of the world. John knew this very well, and was trying to help Mal sort of release this masculine energy that was sort of trapping him. But obviously, Mal could not see beyond the fact that his wife was finally going to do something about his behavior. The compartments of his life had collided.
Yeah. Well, you know what? We shouldn't end the discussion about this man, uh, with his death. I think that we have to think of his legacy, and I think that's really important that that's the way you wrote the book, to make sure that his legacy is out there, correct?
Yes, and for me, that legacy is fascinating, in the sense that he took it upon himself to be this archivist. He was a diarist. He wrote several 100,000 words in manuscript. Um, he was recognizing the Beatles' importance perhaps long before many others would, um, scholars even. And this material, which would have just been a few feet away from him when he died, um, is lost for decades. It ends up in the basement of the New York Life building, downtown, about 30 miles from where I'm sitting right now. And by sheer luck and via an Estonian temporary worker who was there to clean out the storage room, the materials were saved from the scrap heap. I mean, it's that close to them being lost forever. And in that sense, I find that part of it extremely fascinating. Just the sheer luck that this material survived.
And how about the sheer luck of you being able to see it?
Well, all of these stories would be lost. Mal's perspectives, hundreds of photographs. I mean, there are thousands of them, but there are hundreds of them that are vital that I had never seen. Um, his manuscripts, all of his diaries that allow us to understand even in greater detail what was happening day by day with that band. And of course, anyone who thinks at all about scholarship and evidence realizes that this is contemporaneous material. I mean, it has complete authority. Otherwise we're relying on people's memories. This isn't about memory. It's about opening up the diary to July 1968, and there it is, right?
Yeah,
I mean, very powerful stuff.
interesting. Also, confirm his, co-writing role on Fixing a Hole, and the story of Paul McCartney getting the Mother Mary dream that led to Let It Be. Would you
So
like to
I
give that
can't
little teaser to us?
yeah, I can't really help on fixing a hole. I other than having information, other than having information about the fact that Mal claims to have helped to write it, and I think at one point he was literally fixing the whole of the music room roof in Paul's Cavendish Avenue home. I don't know the details on that.
Okay.
Um, I know from Mr. McCartney and Ringo's written about this too, or spoken about it, that Mal helped concoct the title Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. I can only report on what Mal said he did and what he wrote about doing, but I don't know the mechanics of those two really. Let It Be, according to Mal, was written while they were in Rishikesh, visiting the Maharishi, and we know from audio evidence that for quite a while it was Mother Malcolm. Later, during the Get Back sessions in January 1969, it was Brother Malcolm. John Lennon had said apparently, um, you know, why are you calling him mother? I don't like that. Call him brother. He's our brother, you know. We have audio of John saying that. And then by the end of the month, and they record the songs properly on January 31st, 1969 in Apple Studios. By then, Paul is going back and forth and eventually ends up on Mother Mary. Um, Mal is on record, both in writing and during that interview with David Frost, saying that Paul had come to him a few days earlier and said, "I'm going to change it to Mother Mary." It sounds kind of silly for me to be singing about Mother Malcolm. Um, and that's his version of things. I know Mr. McCartney, sometime later, maybe even years, began saying it was about his mother. I like that story. I like the idea that it's Mother Mary. I think both stories actually can coexist pretty well. Art's like that, isn't it?
Yes, of course.
So I'm comfortable with that. Mal didn't care that his name was being elided from the lyrics. He just loved the song and he loved what they did. I mean, he had a kind of, and I think we all do at a certain level, hero worship for Paul. I mean, the way Paul could seemingly out of thin air create music and lyrics is one of the great phenomenologies of our time,
Correct.
and will be remembered for likely centuries. So it didn't matter to Mal that his name was being cut out. He was like, sure, whatever, I just love the song, right?
Okay, I got a question for you. What else are you gonna be working on about the Beatles?
Well, right now I'm working on part two of Mal's story. We're going to put out his memoirs, which he completed sometime in December 1975, but they were not published because of the way he exited the planet. Sid and Dunlop, his publisher, spent many years trying to figure out a way, ultimately unsuccessful. And so what we're doing right now, and this will be out next November, is working on making sure that they're recorded correctly, the memoirs, and illustrating them in the way that Mal had prepared them.
Okay.
So that'll be
So
coming out. That'll be exciting. It'll be a publishing event.
there you go. And my question to you as an interviewer is, will you come back when that is out and we'll talk about it?
You bet.
All
I'd be
right.
delighted if there'll be a full color picture book. It'll be exciting.
Okay. And do you focus on anyone other than the Beatles on your lectures? Talk Give me a little
I
bit of
do.
insight into what else you're doing.
Sure. I would like to move into to continue to write about history, but I'm interested in so many things. I have a Jimi Hendrix project that keeps toying around in my mind, and some others. Um, I do spend most of my, when you're a working professor, you teach what you teach, and so I try to make sure my Beatles course remains current. Um, but there's always something roiling around up here.
Mhm. Well, if you have something that you think you'd like to share with our audience of people about our age, and there are a lot of them out there, over 30 some odd percent, 38% of the population of the United States are senior citizens.
Mm,
And we're the ones that have the memories of the Beatles. At least the living memories of the Beatles when they were busy and we were young. So I look forward to having you come back again, and I want to thank you for being here and
absolutely. Well, as
sharing.
one as
Go
one
ahead.
can to another, I'd be delighted to come back.
All right, and then I'm going to end this with just one more quote, and this one's from somebody named John Lennon. I think we know who he is. The Beatles have left the Beatles, but no one wants to be the one to say the party's over. And I don't know when he said that. I couldn't find that information, but they're always going to be with us.
Yeah, they really are. And in one of his last interviews, um, and you remember that time, as do I, there was a constant parade of Beatles reunion rumors and very serious money being put up to put them back together. Hundreds of millions of dollars, bordering on $1 billion. John said, I just don't get it. You don't need the reunion. You have the thing already that matters, and that's the music. And he was damn right. Those recordings, those are the thing, right?
Yes.
that will
Right.
live forever. That's where the magic is, and that's why they left the road in 1966 to really concentrate on creating that body of work.
That's great. And I think that's the place we should end our interview today, okay?
Alrighty,
I look forward to our next speaking engagement, okay?
you got it.
And we're still gonna go back and try to get those guys if we can, right?
Well, yeah, we're not going to give up.
No, we're not giving up. You and I, the
No,
2
no, I've
Kens, we're
got
not
my
giving up
people
on
are
that,
out there. They're out there.
and we're gonna try to get them. All right.
Hmm.
Everybody, I thank you for listening to the podcast, and we'll be with you next week. And everybody, have
You
a
got it.
great day. Okay. Thank you. I hope that you enjoyed the interview with Ken Womack today. And I look forward to having another interview with him next year, or maybe even this year, based on what he told me about another famous musician. So I'll leave that out there in the air. And I want to just give you some more information, specifically the songs that we've discussed. Maybe you should go on wherever you hear your music and listen to some of these songs. Hopefully, it will cheer you up for the day or the week or the year. The songs are Please Please Me, the White Album, Yellow Submarine, the Ballad of Sir Frankie Crisp, the Rubber Soul album, Get Back, the Abbey Road album, the finished taping of their last concert on the roof. That was quite famous. Uh, Fixing a Hole, Sergeant Pepper's Heart Club Band, Let It Be, Mother Mary. And uh, I was able to find a 1975 interview with David Frost and Mal Evans, which I think would be interesting for you. It is available on YouTube. So it would be look under David Frost. I don't know if you'll find it under Mal Evans, but it's an interesting interview. Give you some more insight beyond what we passed on and the knowledge from Ken. Again, I want to thank you for listening to the podcast. And these notes will be on our website. And I just want you to have a great day, make somebody laugh, and we'll see you next time. Ken out. And that concludes this episode of We Are Olds, Get Over It. Thanks for joining me. I hope you found our conversation both insightful and entertaining. Remember, age is a journey, not a destination. So embrace the wrinkles, the forgetfulness, and the occasional tech frustrations with a good dose of get over it attitude. Until next time, keep laughing, keep learning, and keep getting over it. Ken out.